Hey there, Facebook. It is Vanessa here again, your motivational speaker, trainer, and head coach from Live, Love, Give. And today's message, well, it's coming to you. I was supposed to do this message a lot later in the day because I had a bunch of things that I needed to complete this morning that I'm kind of pushing myself to do. But as always, I can oftentimes get caught up in an amazing podcast or something of value that I'm listening to from extraordinary people all around the world, and this morning was no different. And this morning I got caught up in an episode of the Aubrey Marcus podcast, and it was an episode where he was interviewing Paul Chek. So I didn't know much about this guy before I listened to this podcast episode this morning. But I love Aubrey Marcus and I love his podcast, and I think he's doing extraordinary things in terms of moving the needle forward in our consciousness. And today's topic is just like, I'm going to go back to this podcast. I'm going to re-listen to it because it was pretty mind-blowing. And that's why I'm super excited, and that's why I had to get on camera and definitely present this for you guys. And it's more of a conversation today. So this is just very it's kind of like, it's not new for me to think about the concept of love and consciousness or the ego, but I've got some sort of new insights that I just want to talk out. And I'm not really sold on anything so far. I just really want to have a conversation with you guys, and I would absolutely love to hear from all of you brilliant people out there as to what you think about this, because really, it's all about this question that potentially, without the ego, could we consciously experience love? Now, let's break that down a little bit before I dive into sort of what was going on in this conversation and kind of like some little insights that I'm sort of having in my life right now. But ultimately, I think a lot of us go through life thinking the ego is this terrible, bad thing that we must get rid of. And I think you guys who have been following me for a while would have heard me say a few times by now that I believe that we will never be rid of the ego, but what we want to do is to not allow the ego to determine the course of our lives. And I don't know, this is just really coming up for me right now. So with this, it's kind of, I want to share with you kind of a little bit of a definition of love. It's kind of a new definition that sort of came to me as I heard Paul Chek talk into his definition, and definitely going down this kind of rabbit hole. And I hope I don't lose a bunch of you guys. I hope that you find this as interesting as I do as well, and I hope that it triggers you to think about, what is your definition of love? And how do you feel about the ego? And so I want to just dive in, and I'm just going to be rambling, sort of what was going on in this episode and what I kind of think. But ultimately, what it triggered within me is this new perception of the ego in terms of, that love, my definition of love that I sort of am playing around with right now is that love is kind of waking up to the oneness of what we thought to be separate selves. So if we think about that, so it's kind of this moment, I don't believe that there's many of us who can get to experience that constant being in love. But, when we have that experience of love, what I really feel like that moment in time is this waking up to our connection, to our oneness, to our wholeness, to away from what we had believed that were separate selves. We kind of come into this kind of togetherness, this oneness, and it's this waking up. It's like this aha moment. It's kind of an overwhelming experience of love. That's that experience that we have. And what I'm coming to believe is that the ego is actually the tool that allows us to create and generate that experience of love. It's that waking up process. So in fact, if we think about waking up, it presupposes that we have to be in a different state before we come to and wake up. It presupposes that there has to be some sort of contrast. And without contrast, how would we even know that we were experiencing love? And so this is what is kind of triggering me to believe that the ego is that tool or that vehicle that allows us to fully experience love time and time again. It is the ego that allows us to wake up from the separation or the separate unique self to this moment in time of connection to another human being, this oneness, this togetherness. I don't know how to describe it. It's like this consciousness. It's like a waking up to oneness consciousness. That is love, that is that connection. It's that moment of waking up is that beautiful experience that we all get to have and share. And without the ego who sees us as this separate self, and the ego allows us to strive for different things, to follow what we uniquely want to pursue. And I think that the ego is this beautiful tool that allows us to have a unique experience, a fraction of what is really, if we really go into it, we are all connected. I don't want to get too airy-fairy. I'm sort of just making sense of this in my own mind and hearing from amazing souls who really study in depth consciousness. But without getting too airy-fairy, or maybe you can't not go there to sort of explain this concept, but if we are all one, and if we are all connected and there's no real separation except for what the ego allows us to experience, then the ego is like this tool that we get to experience the whole of consciousness in our own little unique way. And an analogy that I think Paul Chek used in this podcast that I listened to this morning was that if we put a bouquet of different variety of flowers in the middle of a table, and we sat 10 people around that table from all around different angles, and we got each of those people to describe what they saw on the table, we'd get 10 different versions of what the same thing is. And this, I think, was just a great analogy to use in terms of, we're all connected to this consciousness, to whatever you want to call it, and we each have, the ego allows us to have different perspectives so that we can make the most of the opportunity that we have to experience the wholeness. Instead of just having the one experience that we're all connected to, the ego allows us to have the experience of this one thing that we're connected to in a myriad of ways that ultimately magnifies the beauty of everything. I don't know. I'm just talking out loud all of this stuff. So I hope that how I'm talking doesn't sound like an absolute crazy person, and I hope that it actually makes sense. But I'm someone, if you haven't picked up on by now, someone who absolutely loves challenging my belief system, shifting to a new perspective, seeing the world from a completely different viewpoint based on different people's perceptions. And I'm starting to really love this idea that the ego is a tool to experience the fullness of love, because we need contrast to wake up to love. And if we just had love, we wouldn't have the contrast to build that conscious awareness of what we're experiencing. So I hope that that is resonating with you guys. And I also I jotted down just Paul Chek's definition of love, and I wanted to just quickly share that with you guys. He shared two models of this definition, and it definitely triggered my definition of what I'm sort of talking into right now, in terms of love is that waking up to the oneness of what we believed to be separate selves. It's that waking up to the connectedness, and it's like the ego has that choice in life that makes for the richness, the choice between love and fear that we have, that creates the contrast, that creates a rich experience, that creates a unique, individualized experience of the whole. So yeah, I'm going to share with you Paul Chek's definition of love, which was the choice we have to choose. Oh no, sorry, that's not it. That's something I was talking about. Love is the flow of energy and information through empathic, which is to feel, and compassionate, which is to understand, connection to self or others. So love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or others. And he also shared a much simpler version of what definition of love, which is love is consciousness becoming aware of itself. And I just love this. So I'm hoping that me jumping on, and I hope it hasn't been too difficult to understand what I'm talking about, because I'm really just talking out loud some concepts and ideas that are going on in my mind. And it's really more what I'm sharing with you guys today, more of a conversation, more about a what if, more about, this question of, without the ego, could we consciously experience love? Without that having something to wake up from and wake up to, could we be aware of what love is? So I hope I haven't lost too many of you guys. This is a bit of a different one. And as I said, I wasn't planning on jumping on a Facebook Live this early. I was going to do one a bit later, get some stuff done today. But I was so passionate about this and I love learning. So I really just felt called to share this with you and talk it out, because I tend to make sense of things in the world when I talk things out. So I'm using you guys as a bit of my sounding board today. But I would absolutely love to hear from you guys. If you have any questions or comments or any sort of definition of love that you want to share and bring some wisdom to the equation today, I'd love to hear from you. And definitely say hi if you're tuning in. I love connecting with you guys. And my hope is that this type of message just triggers you to get beyond yourself for a moment and just take a meta perspective on the world and what we're doing, and consciousness and the concept of love, and potentially create a better relationship with what your perception of your ego is, as opposed to creating separation and judgment and wanting to avoid egoic behavior. What if we could look at the ego in a way of value, as the tool or the vehicle used to experience love, because it wakes us up from our separation and we get that feeling of connectedness, of oneness, of wholeness, and we experience it on a conscious level because it's not the everyday norm. So, okay, I'm going to check in with you guys. I hope this made sense. I hope it wasn't too confusing, and I hope it was of some sort of value to you guys. But I've got Sean and Justin and Nato and Charlotte and Jason's here. G'day, Sunny Jim. I love it. And Sam's here. Awesome. And Chris and Ty and Adam. Thank you for your compliment there. And Elf's here, awesome. And Edward and James. Sam, yes, not to let ego take the driver's seat. Yeah, and that's how I've always kind of viewed, or for a long time I've viewed the ego, that ego is an inevitable part of our human experience, but to not let it, take the driver's seat and instead, be conscious in our choices, not coming from fear. But this is kind of a new perception on the ego that I'm sort of playing around with. So I love that, Sam, and I love that was resonating. And Bradley's here, and Fazia and Trisha and Jamie and Tristan and Rian and Kenny and Mark and Max and Robbie. Awesome to see you guys. And Elf, good morning, dear Vanessa. Awesome subject of which you explore openly and deeply. Thank you, Elf. I knew this concept would probably resonate with you, and I love that you're joining me. That's awesome. And Noel and Alexandria and Jessica, awesome, and Gozia and Alexandra. I always love when you can join me live. That's awesome. And Gabrielle, awesome. And Justin, the power of one, absolutely. And Judy's here, and Bolasino, and Jeremy, and Philippe, and Peter, and Stephen, Raul. Awesome to see all of you guys. And Jessica, totally get it. Love the flower analogy. Yeah, I think sometimes we just need like a visual or like an analogy to sort of wake us up to understanding these kind of big out there kind of concepts that we don't think about in our everyday life, that can kind of seem like over the head a little bit. So I love that resonated, Jessica. And Anton, Oh, I found it a bit difficult to understand what you mean by ego. Okay, so, and thank you for letting me know. I thought that this might be a little bit difficult to understand. So, my apologies for that, because I never want these messages to be confusing or overwhelming. I want them to be easily accessible. But yes, so the ego, the ego is that part of us that wants to protect us, and when we allow that protection mechanism to determine the course of our lives through unconscious behavior, then ultimately we can be choosing fear over love. We're choosing just to protect ourselves, or whatever the ego perceives as protecting ourselves, instead of moving the needle forward in our evolution. That's why we need to become mindful of that part of ourselves that's just looking to protect, and be in defense of anything that it might perceive to be dangerous, because it can oftentimes overvalue what might be dangerous, which actually isn't. It's not life-threatening, and it can undervalue moving forward and growing. It tends to value certainty and security over growth and evolution. And so if we want to be fulfilled human beings, we need to build mindfulness to be able to notice what the ego is doing, that fearful part of us that's trying to protect, and ultimately be more conscious in our choices, and not let the ego determine the course of our life because it's trying to protect us. But really, how I'm talking about the ego today is kind of like the value of having that fearful part of us that creates the contrast between, separation and oneness, or fear and love. And we want that contrast, because when we have that contrast, we get to consciously experience what love really is, as opposed to be unconscious to what it is without an ego when we're just sitting in love. And so, and sameness. So I hope that made sense, how I explained that. I hope that cleared that up a little bit for you there, Anton. And I so appreciate you reaching out and letting me know that something wasn't making sense. So it gives me an opportunity to hopefully add some value to you there. And Chris is here. And Sam, love this, a deeper meaning of love. Loving that this is resonating, Sam. And Howard and Andrew and Philippe. Love is a big consciousness. We are that consciousness expanded. Yeah, definitely you can look at it that way. And I'm really going on this journey and going deep. So we cannot know everything really, can we? But we can play around with these concepts and ideas and find out what empowers us, what makes most sense to us, and what moves us forward in the direction of a fulfilling life. And so this is just one avenue. And I love that you're sharing that with us, Philippe. Thank you. And Anton, if you relate love to the ego, I think you should define what you mean by ego, Vanessa. Yeah, so I think that you might have written that before I just gave you that definition. So let me know, Anton, if that if it's not making sense to you still, or if I haven't explained myself properly for you, let me know. And Philippe, ego is far away from love. Ego keeps us in the mind. Yeah, so it is like that, like I said, that fearful, protective sort of mechanism that does serve us in some ways. And the way that I want to talk to you guys, and I have been talking to you guys about the ego actually serving us in some way, is this new idea and concept that I'm playing around with that I'm not totally certain about, but we can never be truly certain. And I just want to have this conversation with you guys as a new perception as to how the ego can add value to us in terms of creating contrast in our lives, so that it can wake us up. So we have love, that we get woken up to that level of consciousness that gives us contrast from the ego, which allows us to appreciate both sides instead of being unconscious and in one state of mind. So hope that makes sense. And Luke and Mike and Christopher. And okay, so I think, Anton, I don't know if you just wrote this one, but I think you were saying that true love is what you experience is when somebody breaks through your secret wall. Yeah, I think you could use that analogy. So yeah, I love that. So let me think about that. Yeah, so what I'm really saying is that love is kind of that waking up to our connectedness, where the ego sees us as separate beings and separate selves. And so when we experience love, we are waking up to our oneness, and separate from, it's not like the ego, it's not like we're these two separate beings or these two separate things or separate from everybody else around us. We can experience love when we realize and build consciousness to how we're actually all one. And I know this sounds like it can sound sort of weird to a bunch of you, but I think that it's important for us to be able to play around with concepts that blow our minds a little bit and take us out of our comfort zone in thinking and everyday life. And yeah, so I guess what you're saying there, Anton, I think that, yeah, that's another way of kind of tapping into a little piece of what I'm saying as well today. So I love that. And Nuna's here, and Philippe, I recommend to listen and read Eckhart Tolle or for ego awareness. Absolutely. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle was the very first book that really gave me some perspective on what ego is. So I definitely second that. That was a powerful, powerful book. So thank you for suggesting and sharing that, Philippe. That's awesome. Sam, ego seeks love. How do you safeguard consciousness love being hijacked by ego? Great question. So I think what you just said there in the beginning there, Sam, in terms of the ego seeks love, that is actually what we're talking about today. That is actually, what value the ego has to give us. It is the vehicle that sees our separateness and it yearns for connectedness. And so if we didn't have that part of who we are, seeking for love, would we ever be consciously aware of finding it? Would we have that motivation of finding it? Because we wouldn't have that feeling of separation to be able to find and wake up to that experience of love. And I think that is like the driving force of our being. That is why we are on this planet, is to experience fully what love is, to give love, to receive love, to be love. And we can't do that if we don't have a vehicle or a tool that is seeking to, mend that gap between separation and wholeness. So I hope that made sense with that. And how do you safeguard consciousness love being hijacked by the ego? I would say to you with that is always mindfulness. So when we let the ego determine the course of our lives, yes, it will be seeking for love, but it's an unconscious trying to gain safety and security version of seeking that love. And when we let the ego get in the driver's seat and we're not conscious of what's going on, then we can oftentimes, not create lasting experiences of building awareness to the purpose of why we're actually here. So what I would say to you in terms of safeguarding consciousness love from being hijacked by the ego, I think I'd look at it differently. That ego is actually the vehicle for getting to higher levels of conscious love, and how we maintain that and build that consciousness around love is we develop our practice of mindfulness, which is the ability to ultimately watch what's going on from another perspective, as opposed to just being in the ego and being unconscious to our choices and behaviors. We have to develop a mindfulness practice to watch the ego, allow it to add the value of seeking for love, being that vehicle, and to ultimately then, make choices not from the ego, but from our higher self, from our best self, which is that watcher of what's actually going on and occurring. So we don't want to negate the value that the ego can add. We want to be conscious of its purpose and it being that tool, that vehicle for seeking out and closing the gap between our separation and oneness. And then we just want to be able to consciously choose how we want to operate in love, not let the ego continue taking on all of those roles moving forward. Just talking it out. So I hope that was of value, Sam. I hope that made sense, and I hope that you got something from that. And Alexan's here, and Carly, and Daniel. You've kind of lost it. Yeah, I thought you guys might think that. Sorry about that. But, you know, I just think that, you know, as we evolve in consciousness, like the higher we go up in consciousness, the more we kind of feel like those people who are going in that direction have lost it until we start that journey ourselves and we start to like get little pieces of it. And yeah, so I'm talking it out, but I hope I haven't totally lost you there, Daniel. And Anton, what I meant with breaking through the secret wall is when somebody really touches you and goes through all the barriers you build up over the years. Yeah, so Anton, that's a brilliant way of looking at it. I tend to take the other perspective in terms of we let down our walls because of what we're choosing to perceive about that other person or whatever. So we're actually in control of that. And we take down our own walls based on how we feel it's going to be received by that person. Do we have a safe zone? Do we feel that connectedness? Do we feel like we could go there with that person? And so I think you can look at it both ways, absolutely. And I love how your mind works there, Anton, and I definitely appreciate you sharing here. That's awesome. And I'm glad I didn't lose you. And Albert's here, and Jamie, you're so welcome as always. And Sam, I'm loving that resonated. That's awesome. Awesome. And Philippe, complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Yeah, and its separation. Absolutely. Totally agree. So guys, this was a bit of a random message. It was definitely, Alexandra, ego like pain can alert us to take action now. It's a blessing and a safeguard. Boom. Yes, you know, the ego is a blessing to the conscious mind, and the person who is constantly, you know, checking in with the self and understanding why we do what we do, what decisions will best empower us, and creating that space between you know, what's going on and your reaction or response to it and your choices moving forward. So definitely agree, Alexandria. I always love your input. And Philippe, ego is not who you really are. Ego is a self-image, a social mask. Yeah, but definitely a part of us that definitely it has great intention to want to seek love and protect us. But oftentimes those two things can feel like they're in conflict. So we need to be more conscious about utilizing the ego for that vehicle to close the gap between separation and oneness, but then we kind of need to take over more consciously about how we move forward from that place. So, and you're so welcome as always, Philippe, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And Anton, sometimes the walls are built up so slowly that people are not aware of it. That is why I use the word secret. Yeah, their ego might have taken over without people being aware of it. Yeah, I love that. I love how you've used that. And you're so right that we tend to unconsciously build up these walls and blocks to love through our experiences. And you're so right that they can happen over time so slowly that we are not consciously aware. And so I love that you've used that word secret walls. That's awesome. That's a really great way of thinking about it. And definitely I love that. And Bill, you're so welcome. As always, guys, I am sending you all of my love, light, blessings, gratitude, energy, enthusiasm, everything extraordinary coming to you to wherever you are in the world today. I hope that you are absolutely having an extraordinary day or night. I hope today's message wasn't too over the head and you don't think I've completely lost it. And I hope that you've taken some sort of value from today's message, which is just really me talking out some new sort of concepts and ideas that are kind of falling into place in my own mind, that I'm in the fly of the moment talking it out. So thank you guys for being my sounding board. Thank you for your contribution. I so appreciate the engagement, and having a conversation and a dialogue with you guys absolutely energizes me and lights me up. So thank you so much for that. Sending you guys all of my love, and I will see you all tomorrow. Much love.